Assalamualaikum and good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Helmi. I'm the CEO of the Social and Economic Research Initiative, or better known as Seri. Seri is a brand new think tank, and we are dedicated to looking at issues of inequality, particularly when it comes to digital technology. I'm very proud and very happy and excited to bring to you today our very first event, looking specifically at the issue of digital upskilling, something that is very, very important, particularly as we are facing the pandemic and the economic crises. Let's just start off by conducting a poll. So before you'll see a couple of questions coming up. This will help us figure out where you're coming from, and just as importantly, what would you like us to focus on, not just today, but for future events. Do take your time, fill in these questions, or rather fill in the answers for these questions. And once you're done with that, we'll continue with the events. I would like to introduce our guest of honor, who really does not need much introduction. Yang Berhormat Nurul Izzah is someone who has been in Parliament for 3 terms, and she's a unique mixture of youth as well as experience. She'll be sharing with us, and I really hope to hear much more about the issues of policy implementation on the ground. YB?
Thank you very much, Dr. Helmi. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam hormat. Kita ada barisan panelis bersama kita Datuk Fazli Shah Anwar, Chief Strategy Officer of MDEC, Mr. John Lau, Co-Managing Partner Southeast Asia for Roland Berger, Dennis Low, General Manager Enterprise and Public Sector NEC Malaysia. Dalam belah kiri dan kanan saya diasingkan oleh palang-palang untuk memastikan kita selamat. Of course also Cik Nabila Hussein, the Tech Policy Fellow for Seri. Saudara-saudari yang saya hormati sekalian, terima kasih daun keladi kepada Seri. Tahniah juga di atas anjuran pada hari ini. It really brings me a great pleasure to be part of this initiative, the first session, and I speak to you today as a Member of Parliament representing a constituency of 150,000 people in semi-rural mainland Penang, north of Malaysia. Now, in a constituency, Helmi, which I consider as my fatherland, I am also party to complaints made by my constituents on the poor internet connectivity and spotty mobile data coverage. Now, this poor connectivity comes hand in hand with the high incidence of poverty on the mainland as compared to the state of Penang, which includes the more affluent side of the island. Bottom 40 households represent 42% of my constituency's entire population, and this stands in contrast with Penang's statewide poverty at about 18.5%. There are, of course, promising developments in line with the Penang 2030 vision. We're very fortunate because the Chief Minister has outlined his vision to improve digital infrastructure and foster women's development. So more from the rural heartland are being included in mainstream movements to empower women and improve accessible healthcare services, as well as general awareness on geriatric care, aging. Just 2 days back, on Tuesday, Permatang Pau's local women representatives, they took part in Malaysia's first ever Sidang Wanita, streamed a little bit like this, where you can actually watch on Facebook Live, organized by the Penang Women's Development Corporation. But of course, more needs to be done. The UN recognizes a stable internet access as a key catalyst to the enjoyment of basic human rights. Now, the first step, in my view, towards meaningfully addressing the existing digital divide is to recognize where these gaps are. So I'm very thankful that we have experts as well, the left and right, NEC, Roland Berger, MDEC, to help us find the answers to these questions. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are watching virtually, our pandemic-hit world presents the best opportunity to embrace digital disruption. And what better time to initiate deep-seated changes in the time of a global pandemic? It has been said, and bears reminding, that the SARS-CoV-2 virus has unleashed and deepened the existing divides, reminding us of the need to further dissect the challenges Malaysia faces in overcoming the multiple onslaughts, whether healthcare, socio-economic, all systemic in nature. And consequently, we must do our bit to address the needs of the most vulnerable. And as the country hits a socio-economic standstill, the digital world and related connectivity becomes more urgent and relevant. But to this very moment, the first challenge remains accessibility to data. That would be my point and my opinion. You take internet coverage and connectivity. Despite the complaints I receive from my constituents, every attempt I've made to obtain the relevant data has been quite challenging. Excuses usually range from the inability to disseminate private data to technical issues updating the coverage map and now COVID-19. So just yesterday, Malaysia celebrated our National Day of Statistics. And on that note, let me say that data is the lifeblood of the digital economy and of future-proof policies. Policymakers and legislators must be made, have reasonable and timely access to data in order for us and for all of us to realize where and who lack these basic services. Only through publicly available data, which concurrently protects the privacy rights of consumers, can we ensure public accountability. There's a Khazanah Research Institute study published just last month where it revealed that Malaysia didn't perform too well in all of the established global open data evaluations, and that we have failed to make significant progress on this front over the years. So more needs to be done. If you just take a look at Estonia, I think they've led the way in this regard. 99% of all public services are online, and Estonians enjoy access to their respective healthcare information from a decentralized, blockchain-protected database. The government claims that they've saved 800 years of work time through such connectedness. So digital exclusion is by no means our problem alone. In Southeast Asia, Roland Berger, of course, has better details, but a region of approximately 700 million people, 150 million adult individuals are estimated to be digitally excluded. This exclusion is fueled by, either factors of disability, illiteracy, age, wealth, and the concentration of economic activity predominantly in urban areas. We look to Roland Berger's Digital Inclusion Index, assessing ways to reduce this exclusion. They suggest, accessibility, improved affordability, ability, as well as attitude. Malaysia ranks 21st on this list, notably significant, but where we perform highly in terms of ability and attitude, we lag behind in accessibility and affordability. Now, earlier I raised the issue of digital connectivity in Pematang Pau. A shout out to my kawasan. Indeed, we have been scouring for connectivity blueprint for some time now. Perhaps it's a work in progress, but it goes to show how accessibility of data itself, in my view, including transparency, ensures we lessen the number of those falling through the cracks of digital divide. So ladies and gentlemen, connectivity alone is insufficient without the necessary efforts to upskill people and communities. And upskilling is not just about digital skills. There's an increase, of course, demand for skills like data analytics, coding, but skills such as curiosity, innovation, empathy, and adaptability are equally important. Building a culture that will support this environment to be foundational to an organization's upskilling journey. And consequently, the existing skills in our ecosystems must converge in order for the development of technologies to hit its mark. We live in an age of big data analytics, the Internet of Things, cloud technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and intelligent manufacturing. All mouthfuls, I agree. But with all these new developments and the changing nature of jobs come the need to the appropriate skill sets to deploy these technologies effectively. The reports estimate, this is a Malaysian context, about 50% of the workforce employment will be affected by digitalization and automation. For students in Penang and all over Malaysia, mastering these new technologies means gaining a competitive edge in the market. With the rise of crowdsourcing, the gig economy, and remote and virtual working, there are ample opportunities for students to upskill and participate in the digital economy, provided that we provide them with the right ecosystem. Worryingly, back in March 2019, the former Minister of Education stated that although STEM-related subjects were connected to a new emerging jobs and the fast-growing digital industry, the available talent in these areas were lacking. In 2018, 44% of Malaysian students were in STEM. By 2012, in 2012, it was 48%. So you're looking at an average reduction of about 6,000 students, 6,000 deficits per year. And now with the closure of schools, intermittent patchy online class connectivity, how do we move to stem the losses? I'd venture the need to invest as much as possible in STEM to educate our children in steering their interest, whether in the form of extracurricular activities or project-based learning. But at the end of the day, we must take a serious look at the 4.9 million students who have lost the chance or have, some disruptions in terms of continuing their school experience. My eldest daughter, Safia, she has now enrolled in a program that focuses on project-based learning. And she reminds me, human existence depends on our ability to nurture and coexist with the environment. So aside from thanking Sir Richard Attenborough, I think it's a very confusing and challenging time for parents everywhere to kind of calibrate what is needed for our children as they move forward. And despite the glaring setbacks faced, this period in time also presents immense opportunities. And I believe the government itself has to play catch up. We've been fortunate enough in Permatang Pau to team up with Penang Science Cluster. So our plan is to connect 40 children from underprivileged families directly with a device and an app to boot, aimed towards fast-tracking their learning experience. Now, this is not to say the government has to do it alone. Every stakeholder can do their bit, but it is a call to action for governments to serve its calling as the entrepreneurial state, and invest in multiple sources of golden eggs, inclusive of children ranging from the haves and especially the have-nots. Esteemed guests, the follow-up question, since I think all of us agree with the need to digitally upskill, is how are we sufficiently connecting the dots of convergence? Are these existing skills we have in our midst in Malaysia converging effectively? Now, back in 2019, February was the month that then and now reappointed minister suggested developing our very own homegrown flying car. It raised quite a stir from society and stakeholders at large, perhaps due to our own concerns, experience with the National Car Project, or the mere fact that it perhaps was a bit difficult to believe. But actually, in all fairness, it wasn't too far-fetched an idea after all. Lo and behold, just a year later, Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler's fast-paced, it's quite accelerating spiel on how the future is faster than you think, placed flying cars in its first chapter. From Uber's aerial sharing to electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, partnering with NASA and the Federal Aviation Administration to address regulatory issues, and finally, the discovery of technology to supersede the limits of helicopters. Instead of one dangerous main rotor overhead, you had a bunch of smaller rotors, small fans beneath a plane's wings, enough to lift for it to fly, but minus the risks. So what has been missing in the Malaysian ecosystem, such that we're seemingly left behind compared to the American experience, other than converging, accelerating technologies former French minister, Fleur Pellerin, kept alluding to one key element in terms of making sure you had successful execution on top of ambition and passion. So I think, it's great to learn from past challenges, to build upon them, to make sure that we can do far better in future. And I look forward to listening from the panelists on this subject. Granted, there's plenty that the government has done. I think we just need to recognize what needs to be done to assist the existing offerings. One thing I'm convinced of is Malaysia's pool of talent, and I would quote or refer to the National Technology and Innovation Sandbox. It's an exemplary case in point because it recognizes the possible stifling of innovation through excessive red tape and other related bureaucratic bottlenecks. And you allow for cutting-edge innovation to be unearthed and commercialized by short-circuiting the process. Similarly, behemoths like NEC, Roland Berger, and other private giants play an important role to reduce digital gaps, either through scaling of pilot projects. You should really reinvent the whole concept and meaning of CSR. Now then, with the entire repository of government grants and assistance, I would also quote the findings that Seri made in terms of the number of grants offered. Based on SME Corp's official website, we have about 61 different funding options available for SMEs and startups. And these are options available from government agencies, excluding development financial institutions. You have like loans, grants, guarantees, and equity. However, the 61 funds are administered by 22 different government agencies. So Seri concluded it's really a wealth of offering, but it can also be time consuming and complex and confusing. So unlocking Malaysia's startup potential by making sure the single point of reference, streamlining the process, and allowing the government to track metrics and partner entrepreneurs on their journey is crucial. We should address newcomers who might not have the social capital to understand what their funding options are and how to get them. I would state all this have been a lesson for me too. I have proceeded in my legislative journey in Permatang Pao, and where my team and I have decided to basically partner with brilliant minds and collaborate with successful homegrown startups. We were very inspired by the brilliant work of Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, both Nobel Prize-winning economists, on evidence-based initiatives. And we hope that we can become innovation enablers in our own ecosystem. So now I'm starting to learn, donning my startup hat and learning from the experiences of a Malaysian vanilla bean producer, then immersing ourselves in the world of addiction through the efficacy of harm reduction, and also trying to absorb the myriad of database to learn how do you measure poverty effectively. And we realize if you don't master the digital world and how to use it, you actually lose out. So for me, we have baby steps utilizing devices on the ground to make sure that we measure different dimensions of poverty. No more writing it manually. We utilize smart farming to grow vanilla bean pods. Kairos is the name of the company, right down to their portable solar-powered machines. And we're very thankful that Yayasan Inovasi Malaysia had given them space here to explain this innovative sort of outcome of theirs, to integrating centralized data of women screened for the existence of HPV, human papilloma virus, that causes eventually anal and cervical cancers, with the collaboration of Project Rose, University Malaya. Our collaboration and partnerships have taught us a lot in terms of how to make sure the ecosystem is far more viable and also conducive. Now, I must stress time is not on our side, but we must remain optimistic. And I would like to ask that all of you, even those of you listening online, to join us in this journey. with the app reminder that every brain we convince as to the merits of digital upskilling adds yet another merit and weight to the propel the virtuous cycle moving forward. And I end by reminding myself and governments that we must be at the edge of technological know-how to be able to steer the moral compass of tech giants. Governments must never lose their ombudsman streak to prepare and implement progressive regulatory frameworks, not to inhibit innovative growth, but to ensure that Rakyat remain the main beneficiaries and not mere victims of the accelerating technologies and technologists out there. We digitize so we don't end up being mere monetized victims of exponentially accelerating technologies. And we must all be singularly exponential people. That is our vision. Only then will we be able to help the billions of people out there. Sekian, terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, YB. I feel that we should actually change the slogan to singularly exponential. What was it? Yes, excellent. A lot of stuff was brought up, and obviously you can deep dive into any one of it. So with that in mind, I'd like to hand over to the Tech Policy Advisor or Fellow for Seri, Ms. Nabila Hussain.
Thank you, Dr. Helmi, and thank you, YB Nurul Izzah, for that incredibly enlightening and insightful speech. You've certainly given us a lot to think about. And this brings us to the panel discussion, where we will be deep diving into the challenges brought about by digital disruption, with a particular focus on digital upskilling. So I'd like to start by introducing the panelists. We are fortunate today to have with us 4 panelists, experts from different fields. We just heard from Yang Berhormat Nurul Izzah Anwar, Member of Parlimen Pematang Pau. YB will be joining us on the panel. We also have Chief Strategy Officer of the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation, Datuk Fazli Shah Anwar. To Datuk Fazli's left, we have Mr. John Lau of Roland Berger, the co-managing partner of Southeast Asia. And to my left, we have Mr. Dennis Loh, the General Manager, Enterprise and Public Sector for NEC Malaysia. Members of the media, audience members, please do share with us your questions, and do let us know as well to whom you would like the questions addressed, or if it is a more general question. So as we begin this discussion, I think we really need to start by addressing the digital elephant in the room. We are currently responding to COVID-19. The nation continues to be in various forms of movement control orders. People have been impacted both societally, mentally, physically, economically, having had to take pay cuts, take on more work to make ends meet, or are faced in some instances with the reality of losing their jobs entirely. As we have heard as well, alongside this, we have increasing adoption of automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, creating fears of further job displacement, and creating the question of, are we losing our jobs and our roles to robots? So the first question really that I'd like to pose to all 4 panelists is, what does this mean for the workforce, both current and future? So perhaps we can start with John, and then we can hear from Dennis, Datuk Fazli, and then YB. Over to you, John.
Yeah, thank you. I think let's go back to basics. So what do we mean by digitalization, right? So to put it simple, in simple words, digitalization has enabled companies or governments to collect data, right, and capture this information for better decision making. That's basically it, right? But in terms of data and in terms of digitalization to the general people or to the workforce, what does it really mean? If you look at it, you can put it simply in 3 categories or 3 levels of usage. Number 1 is basically people who are able to just understand or be able to use it, and it's as simple as that. So that's category or category 1. The second category will be people who will need to be able to operate and able to use it and be able to capture data and be able to analyze the data. So that's one step higher. And the third category will be the people who is now the need to do the programming to come up with the algorithms and to be able to, I would say the data scientists will be able to use or program, the kind of software or systems, right? So there's three very different types of impact. So for the first category, all we need to do is to help people to be able to improve their literacy so that they are just able to use it. And this, I think, applies to everybody in general. So for not to be excluded, the very basic need is to be able to understand and use and operate. And number two, then these are the people that needs a little bit more training, where there are a lot of these kind of programs that are available in Malaysia. And third, we are also, for example, bringing schools like 42KL is a peer-to-peer learning kind of programming schools that are now available in Malaysia. So these are the types of things that there's impact. So, but to further add, is not everybody will be impacted. So at least 50% of the people, there won't be any impact. But for those who are impacted, let's basically, there's two things. One, what are the new job requirements? And number two, what is the evolution, right? So new job requirements, like I said, are people who are able to use it. And there are many programs, and I think we can let maybe Dr. Fas to explain, what kind of programs are available and things that are training programs that we are trying to implement in Malaysia so that people can benefit from it. But last thing is, don't be afraid, and it's also creating new opportunities. Not necessarily, people are being dislodged. For example, a graphic designer in Malaysia can be offering his services, his or her services, to people in another company in Paris. So this comes about from crowdsourcing, for example, right? So you can go into a crowdsourcing platform where you can register yourself, or people from YB from Pumartan Power, right, can register and provide their graphics designer services to people. So the companies provide a brief, and then you can bid for it, and you can showcase, and if they like, they will pay for the services. So he has allowed new opportunities. Likewise in the gig economy, right? So people who now can work part-time or even full-time, and leverage the cars that they have and provide transportation services under Grab, for example. So these are new opportunities that digitalization has also created for the workforce. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say thank you, Sri, for having me here. I just want to add on to what John has actually thought about. Of course, the pandemic is an unprecedented kind of event. Nobody had actually foreseen that. But obviously, it accelerated some of the job loss. We can't deny the fact that it's happening right now. But let's have a positive outlook of it. When this phenomenon actually happens, it creates another new opportunity for us. If you look at just before the pandemic happens, just 1.5 years ago, in Malaysia, we have already talking about IR 4.0. And we promoted very strongly on that, and we advocate about the importance of IR 4.0, which will revolutionize the entire industry. That is something that we are dragging our feet a little bit then 18 months ago, but with the pandemic, I think it will accelerate the pace. Now, what it means to us, IR 4.0, in my own context, I would think that IR 4.0 really creates a lot of wealth for the country and new job opportunities. When I say new job opportunities over here means that it is more important for us to do more digital upskilling, right? It accelerates the entire pace because of the pandemic, right? And therefore, I think we should do something about it right now, and it's the right timing. So, in terms of jobs, then when we talk about IR 4.0, there is a structural type of unemployment with a very own pace that we are going through the evolutions of what IR 4.0 is doing. But then again, new jobs are there to actually kind of like replenish. Let me quote it for example. If we have a QA and QC guy who is doing manufacturing to look at any single products if there is a defect, but now there's a lot of lockdown, we have to work from home. How would a QA and QC guy does the job? We need physical examinations of the products in the production lines. There will be new technologies. Technologies is always there. We introduce VR and AR, augmented reality. And the job of the QA and QC now elevated to just physical examination of the product lines to become learning how to control a robot or analyze through augmented reality technology to go and investigate every single product. These are the skill sets that is timely for people to pick it up now, right? It's not all though. I think it's a good opportunity. It's timely for us to really now get our act together, get into the pace, and do a little bit more upskilling in our digital knowledge at this moment. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can add to that, thank you very much, Sri, for having us and my esteemed fellow panelists. I think the final question was, how does it affect and what does it mean for the current and future workforce, right? So if I can take it in three parts, three kind of overarching statements, and I'll just dive into a little bit of that. Number one, it's a great time to have a pandemic, right? Probably compared to recent history, it's probably one of the better times, all things considered. Number two, I think if you're in the workforce, don't worry because these things take time, right? And number three is, as a country, we could be good at many things, but we should only be great at a few things, right? And then that's one of the things that I think the focus is really what's going to determine really the job availability and the direction that the country is going to be headed in. Now, my first point is, I think, and I'm not trying to downplay, I know obviously the COVID pandemic is very serious, but if you look at the fact that we had this in 2020 compared to maybe 2010 or even 1990, there were many things that we were able to do, and hence many jobs were able to continue in this current age compared to maybe 10 or 20 years ago. I'm sure if you had to work from home, you were probably ordering food via your phone, getting it delivered by somebody who's either been working for Grab or has recently moved towards a job in a gig economy like that Grab provides, because they had been displaced, unfortunately, right? So with all things considered, I think even the rate of digitalization that we have right now, you should look at the glass half empty rather than half full. Yes, we still have a long way to go, but there are many opportunities and mitigation methods that has been undertaken in response to COVID-19, which are possible because of the state of digitalization that we're in. Number two is, if you still have a job or you have been displaced of a job, don't worry too much. And then I'm not trying to downplay this, right? But if we look back statistically, the biggest hit in terms of loss of employment in any industrial revolution is now, Desmond touched on the fourth industrial revolution that we're going through. When the steam engine was invented, 20% of the American workforce lost their jobs entirely and never had a future job to go to, right? The difference is those 20%, or that means 1 in 5 workers of the American economy back then, had 4 legs as opposed to 2. They were horses, right? In fact, the number of companies that managed horses went down from 35,000 companies to just 50 companies. But not over a year. It went down by in 20, 30 years. The entire revolution took over 100 years to really kind of affect the major parts of the economy. So, and at essence, with every industrial revolution we've had, you always have to bear in mind that the ones who are making the policies, right, and setting the directions are also other humans. So I'm sure they didn't look at the interest of a horse the same way that they looked at the interest of a fellow human being. And similarly in Malaysia, as the government and different policymakers strive for policies that will push us further, they are looking at your livelihood, and whether it's B40, M40 or T20, they're looking at all those dynamics at a very biased lens compared to other resources that we have within the economy, right? And the third one, as I shared, one of the things that if you look at like MDEC, for example, right? We started the MSc in 1996, right? So it's been quite a long journey, right? Almost 25 years. And then we started with a very clear focus because back then there was no one said digitalization, nobody said digital. In fact, nobody even said ICT at large, right? Like I think the play there was multimedia, so multimedia super corridor. So it was even a specific subset of what became the big ICT sector that we concentrated on. And focus in the early days was actually instrumental and really helped, because then you could project out to the investment community, you could attract specific companies. So as YB touched just now, maybe a year ago we announced a flying car, and internally we thought, that's a bit of a laughing matter, maybe don't take it so seriously. But if you took it quite seriously with focus, you could align many different parts of the existing economy to be able to put a concerted effort towards that. And that's really my big takeaway, which from the fourth industrial revolution, also the experience through COVID, which is that we're trying to solve so many things all at once, trying to make so many people happy, that sometimes the difficult decision, but the right decision, to say there's a few things that's going to take us the furthest along out of this, out of the recession, or out of the economic climate right now. And here are the few things, and then you should try to figure out where you participate within that value chain, right?
Thank you, moderator. I know I've spoken enough, but I thought I'd just add a bit in terms of what John mentioned earlier, that 50% of the jobs that will be kind of affected by digital disruption. But I would just argue, even though the relative 50% is quite safe, the difference is they are not able to fully leverage without the knowledge of digitalization. People who use WhatsApp, people who use, for example, the usual apps out there, they then become, kind of consumers. But without understanding or upskilling themselves, they tend to lose out. So for me, it does affect everybody, and it kind of pushes us, for me as a policymaker, to do my best to help meet those gaps, because then they're more able to either learn from simplified coding, or even the simple thing about collecting data on your phones. I see how the women in my Permatang Power Women's Project are empowered just by this, kind of absorption of new knowledge. And the second bit is the systemic challenges itself. I think, yes, the pandemic has really brought home how robust is our healthcare system, how robust is the management of the economy, and Malaysia has actually done quite well. It's just that you will reach a peak as to how many ICU beds have been utilized. That's why the whole purpose of MCO in the first place. So the robustness of the system during this pandemic just kind of should remind us the importance of investing in healthcare, investing in the welfare needs of the people, so that when you are hit again by another asteroid, you will not perish like the dinosaurs, but you actually are able to evolve with targeting, or by targeting, the right comparative advantages, which I think Dato' Fazli mentioned is true. We can't do everything. We don't have the answers to all the questions that have kind of befuddled the human mind, but we must keep at our core strengths. Yeah. So I just want to share Ben Kaufman's experience with his startup Quirky. One of the reasons why he created this startup was because when he had an innovative idea, and this is America, right? He faced the challenges of, that stood in the way of his invention, lack of financing, engineering, distribution, and legalities. So everywhere, you still need to find ways, yeah, how people with the best of ideas, they don't get stifled, they don't get blocked by virtue of not having the means to access commercialization. So I think to end, that's why we have to begin now, because I feel that this pandemic, even though the World Health Organization stated by first quarter next year the vaccines will come, it doesn't mean that we're not going to meet other future pandemics. There's so many zoonotic diseases out there, God knows. So, na'udzubillah min zalik, but I think it's important, for us to start having the realization now and sort of include that sense of urgency.
Thank you so much for setting the context and really just laying out the groundwork as we delve deeper into the different issues. I think there were quite a number of threads which aligned across all the different panelists, talking about how we need to focus as we address the various issues, the need for us to evolve, how resilience really needs to be at the center of this, whether it's societal infrastructure or institutions that we're talking about, as well as how we need to play to our strengths, look at the glass half full, but also remember that there is a divide. There are divides that indeed exist, and we need to be wary not to widen those. So I think as we talk about the new normal, the global pandemic really has normalized many activities which for us were not day-to-day activities, such as mask wearing, sanitizing, social distancing, and of course the ability now to work from anywhere. With the pandemic, we've seen that work is really not what you do, but it's where you go. Sorry, the opposite. Work is not where you go, but it's what you do. So you can work from anywhere, whether it's at home, your living room, a coffee shop, it really doesn't matter, but it's about how you're productive and how you're able to contribute, whether it's to your own business or to a larger organization. And this allows individuals new opportunities and livelihoods through crowdsourcing, the gig economy, remote and virtual work. And what is really interesting is the fact that it now has mainstreamed people with disabilities into the digital economy. Once we may have had to carry out large-scale renovations in order to allow people with disabilities to be able to be part of an organization, whether that's including ramps or other sort of additions. But today we only need to renovate our digital infrastructure in order to create an inclusive virtual workspace, if not physical. And so I'd like to turn to Dennis as we think about the fact that these evolutions and transformations bring about the need for new skill sets. So Dennis, perhaps you can share with us, based on NEC's experience in Malaysia and also regionally, what are some of the most important new skills that are required to thrive in this digital transformation?
I think this is a very good question. It's very relevant today in our topic for the panel discussion. So perhaps let me set the stage over here. So continuation from just now, we thought about the structural type of jobs will be diminished. I will say that it's very important for us not to get paranoid. In the case of jobs that needs highly repetitive tasks, these are the jobs that can be replaced by technology. I will list down what are the technologies and what are the skill set which is needed for us to compensate. So jobs that really need highly repetitive tasks, that will be easily replaced. However, if you are in the jobs that needs interactions, you need emotions, these are the jobs will remain forever there, right? So there are a couple of technologies, of course, will jump in to kind of like compensate jobs that need highly repetitive type of tasks. In the case of like AI, we talk so much about AI. We talk a lot about machine learning. These are the type of technology will definitely help us to learn, and then will execute the jobs that is highly repetitive. However, this AI will not be able to replace a human emotion, and that is something that we have to be fully aware about, right? In this case, then there are also this thing called change management, the skill of doing change management. A lot of time, I think we neglected when we want to go into just now I mentioned about IR 4.0. We want to talk about digital inclusion. You want to talk about digitalization. These are the keywords that we are always hearing in the industry. But then how do we do it? Because we always think about technology, but change management is one of the very important element over here. Point in case, when the pandemic hits us, we got no choice but to lock down. Most of the countries, in fact all countries around the world, get locked down and everybody work from home. Business has to go on, economy has to thrive. Everybody was trying to do that, and we are not left behind, Malaysia. So in this case, when we want to execute our job, we need some form of automation. We need to redesign, re-engineer our process in the business. Say for instance, we used to have hard copy documents. If you are working in a legal firm, there's a hard copy documents that you need to pass around as a circular, or you need to endorse it and sign. But what about if you put it into the workflow and have a digital signature to sign on the document, and this digital signature is admissible in court? So the entire change management has to take place, and we need this kind of skill set to be developed in order to reach out to the goal of what we call the digitalization part of it. So some of these skills is needed. And of course, the other things that I've seen a lot during this time when everybody is working from home, there's an e-commerce platform, Dato Fast mentioned about Grab. All these things will require some form of trust. And the trust starts from our understanding of digital security. Sometimes we are better known of cybersecurity. And digital security over here, when we talk about, is really about who you are interacting remotely. And they claim that who they are. So authentications, a digital ID is very, very important in this case, right? That has to be assimilated in part of our business process. So cybersecurity is one of the areas, I think, a skill that we have to put a lot more attention. Not the traditional business that we leave it to our IT departments or MIS to look into cybersecurity. But we also need to understand when we transform our business, when we introduce Internet of Things, they are every aspect of the business and the business owner to understand how important cybersecurity is impacting to their business. So if I can highlight, these are the top 3 things potentially is an area of skill that today we should immediately develop: the change management skill, right? The technology on AI and machine learning, and of course, cybersecurity or digital security, sometimes it's known as. I will strongly think that we should have more attention on these 3 skills to develop.
Sorry, I was really happy with what Dennis stated. You're absolutely right. In this world where sometimes tech giants are akin to Panopticon, they sort of have the ability to access any data, billions of people across the world, but where is the security or regulatory element of it? And that reminds governments to be at the cutting edge, meaning the governments have to understand what is entailed when you talk about cybersecurity. The governments have to also understand when you talk about these tech companies, having this trust engagement, but at the end of the day, they're also profiting.
Yeah.
So while I agree with that, there has to be kind of a look, perhaps, what was done in France when former Minister Fleur Pellerin was trying to introduce the digital tax. I mean, these are kind of case studies that really have to put government on action mode, because this is something that's going to take place regardless, and it's going to affect governments more than anything else, because it's going to really change the lives of consumers, and you still need regulation. I mean, I believe in a fair society where these things shouldn't be taken for granted. So yes, cybersecurity is not just the job of the IT department alone. I think the entire system of governance have to take a more active role so that there's no panopticons in place. But even a government, for that matter, is an entrepreneurial, benevolent government, not kind of a big brother danger that we should be afraid of. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I absolutely agree. Cybersecurity has moved from the back room to the boardroom and is now a CEO decision cutting across, C-suite decision cutting across the organization, whether that is private sector or public sector. But at the same time, it is also a shared responsibility, because while governments and organizations invest in the state-of-the-art technologies that are available, we may have the most secure lock in the world, but it's also whether we know how to use it effectively. And on that note of us talking about high technology, big tech, I'd like to turn to John of Roland Berger, because as we're talking about jobs and skills of the future, we do continue to have infrastructure challenges. In some cases, with students having to climb trees to write exams, parts of the country continuing to suffer from lack of access to water, electricity, and internet connectivity. But I must say that this is not peculiar to Malaysia, with the recent World Bank report stating that half of the global population is still disconnected. Digital transformation and digital inclusion are really two sides of the same coin. And so, John, I'd like to seek your thoughts on how do we work to address digital inclusion more effectively, and as Roland Berger has conducted studies on this, perhaps you can share with us what are we doing well as a nation and where can we do better? Over to you, John.
Thanks. Let me first quickly say, what do we mean by digital inclusion, right? Roland Berger, we have done a global digital inclusion index where we rank countries, in terms of how inclusive they are. So what do we mean by inclusion? So in the study, what we did was we measured inclusivity in 4 areas. First is the ability to use technology or the ability to use technology. So that's number 1. And then if you have the ability, then you must have the accessibility. So there's 4 A's. First is ability. The second is accessibility. So you may have the ability, but then you must have the tools, or, your phones or your computer to be able to access. And number 3 is the third A is affordability. So you may have the ability, you may have the accessibility, but you may not be able to afford to pay for a very expensive, connectivity. And last is the attitude. You may have all 3, but if you have a fear that your data may be misused, and you may be afraid of fraud and things like that, so you may not want to use it also. So right, so all 4 is very important in terms of inclusivity. So in like what YB mentioned earlier, there's 700 million people in Southeast Asia, and we think that from the study, more than 150 million people that will be excluded, and that's more than 20% of the entire population. So the figure is is alarming. So we are talking about people who have maybe deaf, blind, disabilities, maybe due to age, maybe due to wealth, maybe due to literacy. So these are very important. So where does Malaysia rank? So Malaysia ranked 21 out of the, I think, about 90 countries that we surveyed. We fared well in terms of the first and the last. So the ability and the attitude is good. Even in terms of attitude, we are ranked even higher than Singapore. But we really we fell behind in terms of accessibility and affordability. So if you look at, in terms of the ability to pay for internet or connectivity based on our income and what we are being charged, although, if you don't, if you compare dollar to dollar, we are paying less, but if you compare, with our, what we are earning, the cost is really high. So there are these, things that we really need to do, to catch up on, if we want to make sure that everybody is, not excluded. So things like, then we focus on, how do we close the gap? So you have SMEs, you have micro SMEs today where they're already struggling, with, the impact of COVID-19. So governments, I strongly urge the government to really help, to see how we can help the SMEs and micro SMEs to close the gap. So coming up with programs, not just in terms of grants or loans, because sometimes they may have the money, a lot of them probably also don't, but they also need to, they don't know what to do. They don't know what technology is out there. They don't know what systems or what software that I should be subscribing to. So they need a lot of help. So, and I think, that is the biggest pool of people that we should be focusing on, of course, not forgetting, the groups that I mentioned earlier. So that is something that, we really need to spend time and effort and money and, to help, because I think from also the numbers, I think we have like over 1 million SMEs, in Malaysia, and that's huge. Yeah. So that is where I think we should really pay attention to.
Certainly, much work to be done, even though much progress has been made. And I think as we continue just talking about the digital divide and what we've heard from John, as well as what YB shared during his speech, the digital divide, as we know, is not unique to Malaysia, and upskilling is really not just about digital skills. So YB, as former MP for Lembah Pantai and current MP for Penang Pau, you have been at the center of efforts bridging the rural divide. And this is in particular focus to skills as well as education. So I'd like to ask if you could please tell us more about your efforts to enable local talents, especially in rural areas.
Thank you, Nabila. I think we started out by commissioning Think City to do a baseline study, a needs assessment on Permatang Pau, yeah, because of course we've introduced some programs in Lembah Pantai, but you want to ensure that you escape the trap of short sendiri, because sometimes you have these programs and you think they're helpful, but you need to really target those who are in need. And Think City is a subsidiary under Khazanah, helped me see the different segments that need to be focused on in Permatang Pau. And that's why we created the Permatang Pau Women's Project. And when we targeted either the groups who love to be seamstresses, the group who wants to take care of postnatal care for women who have given birth, and creating the skill sets for women to sort of earn extra income. And it's been challenging because when you're hit by the pandemic, people rarely make new clothing. So these women have actually taken up the challenge and sewed PPEs, and they sort of passed on to the local hospitals in Seberang Jaya. So I think the important bit is to not just enable them, but making sure the linkages are there. Because once the linkages is there, there's basic utilization of connectivity, digitalization, then it's easier to sort of bring them forward in times of need. The other bit, of course, that we are still grappling with, we've been very fortunate to work with Penang Science Cluster, I mentioned, because when I started, procuring laptops for B40 households, the challenge was there's no internet, YB. So I'm like, right. Then we kind of had to push ourselves and trying to leverage on different agencies, because they're losing so much from not going to school. Like, and I can't even describe how it feels like as a mom to see my kids miss so many school days, but at least they have a stable connection to the internet. They can send their homeworks in time. They have their own respective gadgets. How about the kids in Kampung Pertama? So I hope to really do my bit, because once we start seeing children having vast opportunities, then you can start closing the divide, because it's really about having this lottery of birth. You're born from into a comfortable family, so you get better chances in life. And when the pandemic hits, many more people fall within the poverty cracks. So I find myself trying as much as possible to work with many groups out there. I mentioned earlier the Rose Project. Now, why Rose Project was amazing was before the pandemic, Professor Wu Yinling and the entire team at University Malaya, PPUM, Pusat Perubatan University Malaya, knew when you go to a bottom 40 household filled with women, they rarely go for their pap smear screening or mammograms. Yeah, so they devised a self-test kit to ascertain whether the woman has HPV or not, because HPV will be the first indicator before it leads to cancer. Because HPV is a self-test kit, it's less than 5 minutes, it's not painful, so women are far more comfortable doing the test. So we deployed about 800 free test kits in Permatang Pau, and the women are not just lost in the time of pandemic. The database is centralized. So any given moment, okay, she's positive. Has she gone to for follow-up with the doctor or not? So I think technology, when you prepare, it really helps you to address follow-ups, so that the second phase or third phase, by the time they go to hospital, they're not suffering from cancer, but they are able to at least go for earlier treatments, and lives can be saved. So there's a few others, and I invite more, because we're willing to learn. We have so much more to absorb, and we really need to make sure the impact is seen from the lives of people. So that's how we measure. So we're going to have a very kind of strict measurement with our own selves, so that eventually after 1 year, we see the lessons, and then we can replicate or change accordingly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. I do think this concept of Pematang Pau as an innovation test bed of 150,000 people carrying out evidence-based pilots for a population of 32 million certainly addresses John's points as well on the gaps and how we need to move forward in addressing those. And I do think that it's certainly a concept that we should see scaled across the nation. And it's very much, as YB said, about bringing together talent, people, infrastructure, and institutions and making sure those links are present and strong. And
Add that,
Sure,
to be
please.
fair, the government has done certain initiatives elsewhere. I just read today UTM got a grant from, I think it was under MOSTI, where they developed a new way to produce madu kelulut or kelulut honey. Yeah, and I think this is important because you just want all the small pockets of success eventually converging. Sorry,
absolutely, I do think, I absolutely agree that Malaysia is not short on talent. We have pockets of innovation across the country, and it's so important that we tap into these pockets and make sure that they're seen and they're heard, and that all of us as the rakyat benefit from these pockets of innovation and the talent and expertise that already exists and is homegrown. And on that note about bringing together the different components and making sure that the links are strong, I'd like to turn to Datuk Fazli of MDEC to talk a little bit about, what are the current resources available for those of us in the audience who are thinking, yes, I'm here, I absolutely agree, upskilling is necessary, but I'm not quite sure where to go. So perhaps, Datuk Faz, you could enlighten us and show us where those resources are and what those are. Over to you, Datuk.
Thank you very much. Maybe I can take it in three different sections again. Number one, maybe to address YB's concern of her daughter not going to school. Maybe YB can't comment on how it makes her feel as a parent, but I can tell you that for me personally, it drives me insane to have my kids at home every day. Not that I don't love them, but I have a new appreciation for the skills and dedication of teachers everywhere. So maybe that brings me to my first point. What are we doing with your kids or for your kids, right? MDEC, as of about 4 years ago, we started embarking on what we viewed as introducing computational thinking and computer science learning in schools. We started this by training teachers. We have to date trained over 88,000 teachers that have impacted over 1.3 million students all over the country. But we understood that it wasn't just about training the teachers and getting them excited. You had to provide the facilities there so that children can still interact. Because at least we were introducing them to STEM education and engineering, and so they were playing with little gadgets that they could build. So we've established digital maker labs in particular schools and some universities. We started with computer science. We moved on to game animation because we saw the demand was there, and obviously it's a very exciting topic for students. We then extended that to animation in general, and then now most recently cybersecurity, or at least a version of cybersecurity which is engaging for the student population. Then if you move slightly ahead of that into the guys who are looking for jobs, right? So when you graduate from universities and everything, we partner with some universities for the program, what we call PDTI, Premier Digital Tech Institutes. So what we do there is we try to fine-tune specific courses to match as close as we can the current industry demand. Now this is actually a significant challenge because if you look at the ICT sector, I'm sure a lot of us will agree, it's a very fast-moving sector. So if you introduce something, it may be obsolete in 2-3 years, right? What more when the challenge is that through the MQA, when you try to change curriculum, it typically takes a multi-year cycle, right? So working very closely with the private and public institutions, we've gotten the employment rate out of, which was already admittedly high enough. It was over 80%. We've gotten that up to about 97%. If anybody graduates from computer science and this very computer-centric engineering courses, the industry is picking up. Now, admittedly, I think because we also have NEC on the panel, are we supplying enough to the industry? Now, that's where we face a challenge. Number one, maybe it's not enough for the local demand, but also because, as John and Dennis also touched, it's a global world now, right? So the guys who are graduating out of your Sunway University or University of Malaya, they're not just limited to job opportunities in Klang Valley or even Penang and Johor. They're also looking outward, of course, typically Singapore, but also Australia and elsewhere in the world. So it's a double-edged sword when it comes to trying to figure this out. But what we do know is that you can't stop there. You have to increase the volume, but at the same time, you have to build out the awareness of the graduates that opportunities in Malaysia are, maybe dollar to dollar. There are some differences, but there are many other things to consider about where you want to be based out of, right? And the third is really what happens when you're actually in business, right? When when 98.5% of our businesses, registered businesses in Malaysia, are SMEs, and a large portion of those are towards the micro end, right? They hire a handful of people, and that's the registered businesses. When you take into account the unregistered or informal sector that's been around for a while, MEDAC, which is the Ministry of Entrepreneurship Development and Corporations, they estimate it's about 1.2 million informal businesses. So when you put those numbers together, you're talking about more than 2 million businesses in Malaysia are very small, they're micro, and that's just, I think it's fairly easy to assume that the majority of them probably can't afford to go digital, don't know how to go digital, so where do they go? So as you pointed out, where should they go next? Now, I'm not personally in favor of the government giving out handouts and giving things away for free. I believe that the business community and the students and the graduates have to also earn their stripes and put in their sweat equity into there. But we have started centralizing a lot of the initiatives and what's available to you via dx.com.my, right? So starting from the end of last year, we started centralizing everything to dx.com.my, primarily for SMEs to look at what are the options in terms of digitalization. Yes, there are grants and obviously financing available there, but it's beyond that. There's also to build that business acumen and appetite and awareness, because we do think it is it is not fair for us to assume that every small business owner knows what the future looks like and knows that it has to be digital and will be able to upskill themselves digitally. So we provide a lot of the information. Again, you have to consume it yourself and convince yourself. But again, DX will show you the next natural step for you to go, depending on what you want to pursue for your business. I think a lot of the audience will naturally ask, well, I don't have to think that hard, so what's the most open opportunity? Okay, the truth is, e-commerce probably is the most significant opportunity for many of our businesses. If you look at our businesses, they're either in the service sector or they either trading or making small-scale products. To be able to sell that beyond your constituency, maybe you start in Permatan Power, selling beyond maybe a 25-kilometer radius of where you are, to then the national reach, right? I think it's something that a lot of people have to go to. In fact, there's a side comment here. When we looked at a lot of people being displaced out of jobs from AirAsia and Malaysia Airlines, obviously the aviation industry is very heavily hit. We initially thought, great, they might want to work into global business services, right? Because they face a lot of customers, they have the acumen. But actually what we saw was naturally they try to fit into e-commerce, because obviously the allure is that if you do quite well, you make quite a lot of money. And there's a big trend that happened in China, that started in China but has now rolled out all over the world, which is it's the equivalent of having a shop assistant, right? A sales promoter in the store, but now you do it via your FB Live or your Lazada Live or Bigo and everything, and they're making tons of money selling other people's products. So what I would say to the audience out there is that sometimes when we look at digitalization, we look at it very academically, like I have to be a data scientist, I have to get A, B, and C and D skill, and then I can do something. But sometimes it's skills that you already have applied in the digital context that can give you like very fruitful returns.
Thank you so much for that. I'm cognizant of the fact that we have 20 minutes left on the clock, and we would like to turn to the audience and open it up to questions. There are some questions which have already come in. So I'd like to start us off with the first question, which reads, while technology has been progressing rapidly and increasingly also become the platform to drive inclusivity, we have an opportunity to advance the policies. How do you see us seizing the opportunity to not do incremental policy shifts, but in fact to leapfrog and even replace some of the policies which have been created for the analog world? This is open, but I am looking to you, YB, if you like. No? Or perhaps Dr. Fazli?
Yeah, maybe I can take a first go at it, right? Earlier, YB also mentioned, and John mentioned the struggle we have around data, right? So when we talk about obviously moving from analog to digital, data is a key component. Now we have to bear in mind that over the last 60 plus years of our nation's history, most data policies or policies that affect data governance were not designed with an overall data picture in hand, right? They were designed for a specific purpose. For example, law enforcement or registration of companies and all that. So it is time that the government starts looking at an overall view of how does data interplay to not just facilitate businesses, but link all the existing acts or things together, right? this is a big challenge because it's exactly why, like Dennis mentioned just now, you can do most of the process online. Then suddenly you find out that you have to sign a 30-page document that has to be, has to have a wet signature. Your lawyer has to cite it, or not. It's not enforceable in court, right? So most recently, the DOSM, the Department of Science, the Department of Statistics Malaysia, is leading this effort to look at overall implications of data governance and try to make a mother act for that, right? So I think that's one of the key things that's going to unlock what we have right now in Malaysia. We have data protection, we have PDPA, you also have the OSA. We don't necessarily have a clear mechanism for data sharing, right? So I hope that this new ACTA that's being worked on will address both of those issues so that it becomes this feasible platform where different agencies and players in the economy can fit in and out of each other's data.
Sorry, before Dennis, just to proceed with that point, on that point, it's very crucial for us to understand our limitations. It's true, some of the laws promulgated in the past, some of the ways of approach is very linear. It's stuck in the old mold. And that's the progression that affects our brains, right? Our human evolution is very linear in nature. Whereas when we talk about digital progression, it's disruptive because it's growing at an accelerating, exponentially. It's growing exponentially. So because of this, I think it really pushes policymakers first to, of course, upgrade existing law, also to look at the big challenge staring us in the face, which is our lack of data sharing. It's costing different segments. For example, today, I remember I was talking to a few companies wanting to assist lung cancer patients, but there's no centralized database of where these patients are all throughout Malaysia. Of course, China has that data, and you don't really have to focus or follow 100% what is being done there because there are concerns in terms of privacy, there are other concerns in terms of making sure it also balances the right of the individual versus the big state. And that's why I mentioned Estonia. But for me, Dato Sri Uzair, who's our Ketua Perangkawan, has understood this. But there are challenges, certainly, because different ministries also have relative ownership, and they're concerned about data spillage. But we really need to figure out this formula, and by the same token address previous hackings that have made consumers feel, can I trust that my data is being managed carefully? So the government has to be at the cutting edge of all of this, because we cannot lose out. I cannot help, for example, or even government agencies will have limitations if they're not on the centralized database where people are in need of assistance or simple things, right? Where are they? How do you access them? How do you provide assistance and help? So it's important to take stock of this, but it's also important to have a more open attitude. I know John mentioned we're quite open in terms of sharing and in terms of how we look at the digital, the use of the digital world, but I think more needs to be done. And one of the ways is to say, spell it out. What would data sharing mean? How would I, as a consumer, feel protected? So when you have clear issues addressed through this new law, as envisioned by Dato Sri Uzair, inshallah, I think we'll get somewhere. But we must start by taking stock of our limitations.
I also just want to quickly add, don't forget that we also need to align our educational policies, because that's also fundamental, because these are the people that the future of the workforce in Malaysia. So we need to quickly, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but very quickly, we need to now start aligning, the whole education system towards, the future, towards digitalization, helping our kids, the students to be able to, participate well and to be able to be, a valuable contributor to the new world. So I think that's also a very important point. Yeah.
So to answer this question, NEC being a Japanese company, I would like to just reference back to some of the things that is done in Japan. 5 years back in Japan, there is an event, the 5th Science and Technology Basic Plan. That's where they came up with this model called Society 5.0. So what is Society 5.0? Society 5.0 is all about human-centered. There's a crossover between the cyberspace and the physical space. So what does it mean over here is simply because where we are today is we are consuming a lot of data. We do analytics, right? The analytics is done when we download all this data, and this data is only privy to you. But what about data sharing, as what mentioned by Dr. Fras and also YB? So we do not have a specific law or even a regulator to really understand what is this data sharing is all about. If you refer back to Society 5.0, it's all about human-centered. The processing analytics is all done in the cloud. It's not by human being. It's done by robots. And where is the demarcation right now? How do we want to regulate that? Because all action prescription of the analytics is done in the cloud, not by any human beings, because it's done by AI. Will straight away assimilates into the every aspect of our life at different type of level in the society. And that's what means by Society 5.0 when we are talking about that. And Japan is preparing for that framework, right? So we really need to, I kind of like this question. There are certain laws, I would say that there are laws for analogs, but I think we need new laws to regulate in how we can do this data sharing, and not to mention that this data sharing happens within the ecosystem itself. And it's not just about individuals that have privy to certain information and you want to download and start doing analysis, right?
So there's clearly a need for new laws and policies which are progressive, forward-looking, and address the digital world, and not simply a lift and shift or us trying to force fit today's challenges by applying analog policies made for an entirely different world. So for us, looking at the next question, so this question again is to all panelists. When it comes to digitalization, there are three main elements: people, process, and technology. As mentioned by one of the panelists, most people look at technology but forget that people is really the most important element. And so the question is, how do we tackle the people component of this, both non-technical as well as technical backgrounds, as when we look at digitalization? So, esteemed panelists.
Yeah, maybe
yes.
I can start. I think the first point I would like to say is inevitable, and we like it or not, digital will be part of our life. So my first comment will be, don't be afraid, and try to embrace technology, embrace digitalization, and try to see how we can best use of it. So look at it positively. I'm generally a very optimistic guy anyway. So try to look at things positively and say how can it help me in my daily life? How can I best leverage to have a better quality of life, both in terms of lifestyle, also both in terms of income, opportunities, new business opportunities, etc. So the change in the mindset is very important. Embrace technology, embrace digitalization. Go out there and try to see how can I learn. I mean, there are tons of materials out there that is able to help you to improve your literacy, improve your skills. So the first thing that I would like to say is change the mindset, look at it positively and not negatively, and try to embrace it as part of our life, part of our job, part of our culture even. Yeah.
If I may just add on, I want to give a very good example over here. In NC, one of our business unit is driving a lot of PABX business. PABX, as you know, that it works in the office, right? When you are working from home, it just simply does not work, right? And those who are dragging their feet that they wanted to unify their entire communications, right now they are asking for it because they have experienced it when they are working from home. They have tried out Zoom. Today, our event is via Zoom and FB. And they have tried out other more technology like Microsoft Teams and the rest, right? So when they are gradually coming back to the office, the first thing that the COO or the C-levels are asking is that we are so used to in that 3 or 4 months during MCO, and we want that to be part of the unified communications together with our PABX. And that is a great sign that people are changing.
we should not be waiting for a pandemic to happen to change fast, right? We should be brave enough, like what John said, go out, acquire new skill set, and that will be valuable to the business, right?
I think, in my own experience, and it's still a work in progress, but I like the vision statement which I kind of came up with the team in terms of wanting to be the singularly exponential people. And it means any organization, we actually utilize a lot of empathy as well as inclusivity, because not everyone's going to come from the tech experience or tech background. God knows I graduated as an electrical electronics engineer, and I don't think I remember much of that field. But again, it really requires us to place people, whether they're starting with IR 1.0 or even 2.0. Does it mean we exclude them? Of course not. You allow people for as long as they want to evolve, to begin and move at their pace. But in doing so, you embrace the entire new age of the digital world. So I think that vision is important in any organization. When you have empathy, inclusivity, you'll get somewhere. And we have a non-exhaustive list of examples. The failure of Kodak, how Amazon managed to overcome so many other companies, because why? They didn't want to seize the moment. So carpe diem, in that sense, has taken on it has to be optimistic tone, because there's no other way to go. So I think we have been far more successful as a species compared to others, thanks to what Sir Richard has explained to us. And on that note, this optimism should fuel our empathy and inclusivity to be more prepared.
Yeah, if I can add, I think everyone's already shared really, really great points. What we've seen in some organizations is, and if I can summarize, is that you have to convince your boss to do it, right? It really is. Yeah. So on a very practical level, companies, no matter your size, and we've seen companies which are, and so we've seen companies which are 20 people, and we've seen companies which are 6,000 people, right? And it ultimately comes down to the top-down approach. I think it's just a practical thing that we have to accept. This is the reality of the majority of businesses in Malaysia are very much top-down led. So if you don't have that buy-in from the C-level, and then and in many cases, the board of directors, it's not going to travel very far. We've seen many instances where you start a little digitalization. Yes, the call to action and the emphasis must be there. We've seen a lot of examples where you start a little digitalization journey, maybe a little experiment, a little pilot. When it's very technology driven, it'll only last a while. A few months, maybe a few years, eventually people will just forget you even tried it. But when it becomes a very top-down approach, then they had to think about the entire exercise more holistically. Maybe I shouldn't name the organizations, but there is a fairly large 6,000 man organization that's trying to digitalize right now. And we're very proud of them because they don't just look at it from digitalizing the processes, but they want to understand how the different 6,000 jobs will be impacted by this. They have some subset of them that go down to businesses and enforce certain things. They look at how technology will enable them to make their their jobs more efficient, but at the same time, what do they have to do to onboard? The guys who are having this job are typically a slightly lower educated demographic, so they're not scared of it, right? So I believe that if you were starting from somewhere low or mid in the company, you have to first start by convincing the top and working your way back from the top into a very holistic and concerted effort. And you have to understand that it'll be probably a multi-year exercise. A lot of companies we meet, I think naively think, I install Zoom, I use Google Drive and all that. Boom, we're digital. Next thing you find out, how the people are still sending emails back and forth with the file attached in the emails, right? So it's not. It's beyond that. It's a whole transformation.
That was such an important point. I just want to add on the importance of flattening the organization. I know it's very alien to Malaysia, but honestly, flattening an organization means the best ones with the best ideas should emerge at the top. And it might not come from the boss, because sometimes, hey, the boss is Generation X, yeah, but still very smart. Just, we have our style lah, kan? But the point is, if it comes from someone low ranking in an organization, we need to flatten the hierarchy so that it doesn't get lost in the pomposity and the protocol nature of organizations in Malaysia.
So the importance of us working towards flattening organizations while also in the interim recalling that tone from the top is incredibly important. But we also need to be cognizant of our limitations while we, of course, look to see how we can look at this positively, think about how it can benefit the individual, the organization, and society at large. So this really brings us almost to the end, and I'd like, in closing, for us to turn to all the panelists, and I'd like to ask the panelists to please share with us your aspiration for Malaysia. So paint us your vision for Malaysia in 2030, and what is one effort or one policy which we need to implement immediately to make that a reality? Perhaps we can start with John.
Okay. For me, my vision will be the 4 Ps working together. So PPPP, the public, private, partnership, but also the people. So in anything that we do, I think we have to. I mean, the governments have to work closer with the private sector, but not only with the private sector, but also engaging with the people. So policies where so it's not just coming from one entity to the other, or coming from top down, but engage. Try to understand better what the private sector wants. In any initiative, right? And also try to understand, what the people wants, at the end of the day. So for me, the vision is when, the 3 Ps can work together and partner very well. That's when the nation will progress. And that's my hope and my vision. And I think, hopefully, we can get closer and closer, to that stage. Yeah.
If I can share my vision, I guess in one word, I'd summarize it as focus, right? Hopefully in 10 years, there are a lot of fancy terms that are thrown around right now, right? AI, blockchain, fintech, all the things on the 4th IR. God knows, maybe the next thing you're going to hear is 5th IR or Society 6.0, right? So I think in 10 years, if you look at Malaysia, hopefully we figured out what works for us. Like YB said, what's our competitive advantage? Which industries are really most opportune, where we can help, and as I just shared this now in my answer, a holistic approach of digitalization so that it works well for everybody. I'm not saying a totally equitable transaction, because in reality, when you run this as a commercial concern, right, some people are going to win, some people are going to lose. We have to understand that it's a net effect of that moves the economy forward. Case in point, I think if you look at Indonesia 10 years ago, I'm sure nobody in this room would imagine that they would have a significant startup or innovation ecosystem. And the truth is very different to Malaysia. The Indonesian government they haven't been this encouraging, but they have not been as supportive and evident as how the Malaysian government has been in our formation of an innovation ecosystem. But lo and behold, 10 years on, you have the likes of a Gojek, Tokopedia, all these guys really private sector driven. So as much as I would also advocate for focus in terms of top-level policy direction, I hope that the government also allows private sector to experiment as much as they want at their own cost, in whichever ways they want. And some of this out-of-the-box or big swing for the fences kind of private sector initiatives may really take off, right? So I don't really know what 10 years in the future looks like, but hopefully there's some focus there and some big wins.
I'll probably take this before we have a ceremonial end with YB response. I think I want to be very bold in my response in this case, because this is the only chance that I can actually provide my view to the government. So just referring back to this, what Japan is doing for Society 5.0. They are tearing down certain walls between ministry and agencies. Point in case, I think I want to highlight over here is that if there is much collaboration done by perhaps maybe MOSTI and MOE, because I think I kind of like refer back to the other class just now, one of your points saying that maybe we shouldn't be throwing out grants. Throwing out grants is good, but we are waiting for the right candidates to actually take up the grants. But in our case, if there is a combined MOSTI and MOE together, MOSTI know what's the direction of the country by 2030. They will start doing engineering of the resource pool that we have, right? Point in case, maybe they may even introduce programming as a third language beside English and Bahasa that we are learning in school, that's used to be, and we are still doing that, programming could be the third language. And we kind of like know what sort of talent pools and resources that we have to drive towards the agenda of what Mosti wanted to be. But what we are doing right now, I think we are trying to applaud the public to take up this innovation that is driving down by Mosti. I think Magic did a good work, but I think we can do more. We can do it more targeted in the sense that if we can put these two ministries together and work towards it. Right? That's my feedback.
Well, I think, the panelists have actually highlighted key aspirations when we come to 2030. It's never easy attaining a vision, but I hope by that time we would have been able to unlock the true potential of all Malaysians, because everyone would have their core potential, and what we need as a nation is to be able to maximize the opportunities for them to do so. And that has to happen with a clear look at how we can make the Malaysian society far more compassionate, inclusive, and caring. And I say this because the overarching kind of vision that encapsulates the greatness of the society is, yes, you unlock the true potential, but never forgetting those who are most vulnerable, and that's how you measure the greatness of a nation. So that would be it. And I think God knows what's happened in 2020. It's been very challenging indeed, and hopefully here's looking towards another 10 years of positive, amazing growth. But thank you, the panelists. You've really given me a lot of insight, and I look forward to Seri organizing future events. Thanks, Nabila.
Thank you, YB, Datuk Fazli, John, and Dennis. So that brings us to the end of our panel discussion. A couple of key words that we kept hearing, which really I think was the threads cutting across: focus, partnerships, the importance of data, education, and forward-looking policies as we move forward. I think we need to remember that technology can be both a tool and a weapon, and we have a responsibility not to widen existing divides, especially as the pandemic creates unexpected costs, both economically and socially as well. Before I hand over to Dr. Hilmi, I'd like to leave us all with a quote which comes to mind, and it's really along the lines of the fact that the future is already here, but it is not equally distributed. And what really strikes me is this quote that says, "The cure for cancer may already be here, but it may be in the mind of someone who does not have access to education or to skills." And so it is really upon us, whether in public sector or private sector, government, to come together, really join hands and create a strong, resilient, and inclusive society. Thank you so much once again, panelists, audience members, and over to you, Dr. Hilmi.
Thank you, Nabila, for that wonderful end and wonderful quote. It's also good to hear the aspirations for the next 10 years, although to be frank, I would love to know what's going to happen in the next 10 days. So I'm going to end as well, and thank you all for tuning in for our very first event. There is a question on Facebook on whether or not Seri will be having a digital upskilling program, and we are actually in talks with a company to help us with that. So do log into our website, seri.my. Do follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Just search for our name, which is the Social and Economic Research Initiative, and we will be in touch. Thank you so much for joining us, and take care.